Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller, your guide and fellow traveler, as we discuss what drives you. When you know what drives you and understand why, that's when you get where you want to go. So friends, I have continued to be skeptical of this whole manifesting concept until now. Bear with me. This is a little longer intro than normal. I feel like I've finally been shown and convinced, honestly, that I have been and always am manifesting most of my life. I don't believe I'm all powerful. I don't believe I'm God, but I do find that I generally reap what I sow. What my mind dwells on seems to come to pass. And my mind, our minds, naturally tend toward negative thoughts. Think about it this way. We tend to think, or it's common to think, I don't want to get sick. There's COVID going around, or there's, flu going around, or grandma's sick or whatever. Now, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get sick. Well, our subconscious is what I'm being taught. It's just comprehending a focus on sickness. And it goes to work towards that. What I need to do is focus on being well. I want to be well. I'm going to stay well. I am going to stay well, and let my subconscious go to work on that. It's benign. It'll do whatever I program it to do, in essence, is the concept that we're going to talk about here. What I need to do is focus on being well. Let it go to work on that. Let it bolster my immune system. Let it steer me toward feeling positive and optimistic. Let it increase my awareness so I'll make better health choices and avoid things that weaken me. So, to expound on this topic from a scientific perspective, I bring you James R. Doty. So James is a brain surgeon. His playground is the brain. And he has studied the concept of manifesting from a neurological standpoint. And he leaves the woo-woo concepts out of the conversation. Dr. Doty has been on the faculty of the Stanford University School of Medicine since 1997 in the Neurosurgery Department as a professor, and more recently as an adjunct professor. He's also the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford, of which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor. Well, I admittedly did bring up faith and God, and I feel that they can actually coexist with this scientific explanation. Now, you can listen and decide for yourself. But James brings us to considering legit neurological issues that are known, like value tagging and our selective attention system. And a concept I feel like is just so basic and tangible. It's called target fixation. It gets brought up in regards to motorcycle accidents, but I know it from my life as a pro cyclist. And it's where when a rider becomes so fixated on an unwanted target ahead that it causes them to unconsciously steer toward it and wreck. You focus on where you want to go, and that's where you'll go. You don't focus on where you don't want to go. That's really basic, but profound to think about how we live our lives, our thinking lives. That concept alone covers so much ground on what the neuroscience of manifesting reveals to us. And this is more than hopeful. I feel it's actually revelatory. And Dr. Doty's new book is called Mind Magic, the Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. That's what we are going to dig into coming up next. James, it is a gift to have you on. This issue of manifesting is, the first person who told me that gluten was bad and bread was bad, I just had no place for in my life. Are you kidding me? This is one of the most historic bread. This is history, man. And had no thought towards that for quite a while until my eyes got open. It's not the same bread we used to have. Yada, yada. Manifesting is somewhere along those lines. When that first came to my awareness, I really discounted it. And you address so many of the issues. So we're going to start right at the top with some big 10,000 foot or foundational issues. But I'm so grateful for your work. So thankful you're here. And I'm so eager for the conversation. So thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's great to be with you. And let's talk about it.
I'm going to hit right off the bat what you start the book off with. And it's the universe doesn't care about you.
Well, that's not quite what I said, but effectively, that's what.
Effectively. I cleaned up the version a little bit, but I want to give you context, James, because I haven't focused on that, but somebody who that came up, I had Dandapani on the show, former monk. and actually pulled it out. He has it, kind of tucked away in his book, but he said, in taking charge of your life, you should not leave it up to the environment or, God forbid, the universe. The universe is going to guide me. I can assure you Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus are not sitting around figuring out how to solve the complexities of your life. Your mind's a tool and you are in charge of it. So I had that in my quiver, and now you come along, and I really appreciate your take. But if you want to unpack that for listeners a little bit, the universe doesn't give an F about you is actually what you said. So,
well, first of all, I think as your monk friend said, whose name has already escaped me,
Don Depani, yeah.
Don Depani, he's absolutely correct. And this is part of the problem, is that so many people look outside of themselves for some magical solution to make everything better, or to solve all their problems, or to give them what they want. And in fact, there's something that's frequently associated with the term manifestation, at least in the eyes of the lay public. And this is something called the law of attraction.
Yes.
And this terminology has been intertwined with it. And this is from Hermetic literature from the 1st and 2nd century, with the statement, as above, from below, or something to that effect. But basically, what it says is that if you put an energy out there, the universe will bring energy in and magic will happen. And then this was later embraced in the New Age movement in the 19th century by a guy named Phineas Quimby. And then it went into the 20th century with Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, followed by The Secret, which I think is probably what most people are familiar with. And of course, The Secret sold many, many copies. But the problem is multifold. One of the problems is a narrative of I want.
Yeah.
And what happens is, especially in Western capitalist society, there is a definition of success that actually, I think, leads people astray. And it's defined as success being power, position, and money. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is a very self-oriented narrative.
Yeah.
And what happens is so many people believe that if I just get X, Y, or Z, everything's going to be okay. But the problem is the X, Y, and Z is I want a mansion. I want millions of dollars. I want a Porsche. I want X, Y, or Z. And it's very, very self-serving, with the thought being that if I just get those, I'm going to be happy. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you from my own personal experience, and as you probably know from my first book, Into the Magic Shop, I grew up in a challenging environment. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child. And she was partially paralyzed, seizure disorder, chronically depressed, attempted suicide multiple times. We were evicted from a variety of residences. We were on public assistance. And so I believe that if I got all of these things, that would make me whole. That would make me okay. That would fill the emptiness that was inside. And I had a chance encounter when I was 12 with a woman in a magic shop. And she was an incredible person in that she was one of these people, and I'm sure you've met them, who has sort of a personality that just embraces you with this like radiance about them. And it turned out she was the owner's mother. But long story short, we had a conversation, and she said, I'm here for another 6 weeks. If you come in every day, I'll teach you something that could really help you. Because I really was filled with hopelessness and despair because of my family situation. And normally I wouldn't talk to people about that. But in this case, this woman created what we call this environment of psychological safety. I didn't feel she was judging me. She made me feel comfortable. She was open. She was kind. So I told her about my life when she asked. And so what ended up happening, and this was before the terms mindfulness or neuroplasticity were discussed. This was in the late 60s. And so she took me through a period of exercises, which I'll describe to you in a second. And it really did change the trajectory of my life. But as a 12-year-old, I did not have insight or self-awareness to be discerning or to understand everything.
Yeah.
And the first thing that she taught me, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate it, although it is now being recognized much more, is that when you grow up in an environment like I grew up in, it's a constant state of chaos, uncertainty, and you can never plan for anything. So as a result, it's like living in a war zone, and because your muscles are tense and you're always looking around because you never know what's going to happen. And the problem with that is when you're in that environment, it's hard to be present because you're planning for an uncertain future and you may have to act. And the problem is if you're not present, you can't attend, you can't learn because you're fully focused on survival. And when that happens, of course, your sympathetic nervous system, or what many people know as the flight, fight, or fear response, or freeze response, is engaged. And when you're in that mode, you're just looking to survive. You're not looking to process what are my options here. And this is another thing that separates you from the ability to attend, because when you're so distracted in just survival mode, you don't have access to this part of your brain, which is called our executive control function. And this has access to memories, prior experiences. And actually, this leads up to us being more creative, more thoughtful, thinking about various options. But when you're in stress mode, you don't do that at all. You're just looking to survive, as I said. So anyway, the first thing she taught me was a mindfulness technique, or what's now called a mindfulness technique, which was a process to relax the muscles in your body because I was tense all the time. And so after a period of doing that, she taught me something that she called taming the mind, which was the ability to attend and focus. And then she made me realize that I had a negative dialogue going on in my head. And almost everyone I know has that. Now, it's in varying degrees. And this is as a result of what we call negativity bias. Because as a species, to survive, we had to be attuned to negative things in our environment that put our survival at risk. So those are the things that get your attention. But unfortunately, as a side effect of that, these negative statements come into your head, and oftentimes they repeat. And the problem is, for so many of us, if we sit there and say, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve, it's not possible, we create that reality. Because the mind doesn't know the difference between real and not real. And so once you make a statement, it is not possible, that becomes truth. And so she taught me a technique to change that dialogue of one of self-affirmation. But the important part of that is she also made me recognize that everyone is suffering.
Yeah.
And that really changed everything for me, because I used to have a lot of anger and hostility towards my parents, as an example. Not because I didn't think they loved me, but because they weren't there for me. But the problem was they did not have the tools themselves to help themselves. And once I recognized that they were suffering in their own way, I was a lot more thoughtful and kind to them. And I also changed how I looked at the world, because when you carry your own anger, pain, and hostility, this emanates from you, and it affects interactions with other people. And so that really changed how I saw the world. But the last thing she taught me, which is very much relative, as well as what we just talked about, was she taught me a visualization or manifestation technique. Now, here's where things went awry, for me at least. Because I was 12 and had no insight and self-awareness, she said, make a list of things you want. And I thought I wanted was to be rich,
Yeah.
was to have a mansion, was to have a sports car, in this case, a Porsche at the time. I was very impressed with a friend of mine's father who had a Rolex, and I used to look at it when I was over at his house. And so I made this list that had all of these things on it. And one of those things on the list was also to be a doctor. Now, that got on the list because when I was in fourth grade, it was Professions Day, and a physician visited our classroom. And he was so kind and thoughtful, and he treated me like an equal that at that very moment, I wanted to be a doctor because he helped people. So that was on my list. Long story short, I achieved every one of those things. And you could say that was through a process of manifestation, because what she had me do was make a list. So I wrote it down. I read the list silently. I read it aloud. I visualized myself being a doctor, as an example. And I did this over and over and over again. And we know that what fires together, wires together, or vice versa, whichever way you want to think of it. But through repetition, you strengthen neural pathways. And so ultimately, I got everything that I wished for. The problem was that it was all self-serving. I was doing these things so that I would get external affirmation. And this is a problem for so many people today, is that we think that this emptiness inside of us will be filled by telling us how great we are. And it doesn't. And so I would climb each of these mountains. You know, I became a doctor, I became a neurosurgeon, I became an entrepreneur, and was very successful at all of these things. And in fact, at one point I was living in a penthouse. I had a Ferrari, a Porsche, a Range Rover, a Mercedes, a BMW in the garage. I had a mansion overlooking Newport Beach. I had a villa in Florence. I was dating very attractive women. I was flying around in private jets. And all my friends were saying what a great life I had. But the reality was I was never more miserable than I had ever been in my life. Mm-hmm. Because that external affirmation did nothing for me. It didn't fill me with anything. And it took a dramatic event for me to sit down and reflect on what happened to me. And that ultimately led not only to the first book, but to this book. And what happened to me was that, as I mentioned, I ended up being very successful. And in fact, during the dot-com period, I was worth about $80 million. And I had borrowed $15 million from the bank, because at that time, if you had this stock, even though you couldn't cash out yet, it was assumed you could. And so I borrowed $15 million, and I bought this penthouse and these cars and all these different things. And then during the dot-com crash, I lost a lot of money and was $3 million in the hole. Yeah. Now, what happens with that is that two people become your best friends. One is your banker, because he wants his money, and the other is your lawyer, who is there to help you get out of all of this. Yeah. And what happened was I went through this period of great reflection, and I realized that I missed something. And can
I speak into that? I want you to hit what you missed, but I really appreciate the candor of your story, because you go into it saying, here I am in this, this mansion with all the toys. And you even said a second ago, I was a success. We would say success, quotes, by the world's standards. You had money, power, fame, acclaim, whatever. And so you had achieved the possessions and the achievements. And yet here you are in the mansion, totally alone, with your wife gone, with your, I think it was a daughter at the time, yes. Gone as well. And you're alone. So here are all these great things. And yet, I mean, that is that's the consummate story. What is it? The old scripture, benefit a man to win the world and lose his soul. And you lived it. And here you are going, well, son of a gun. They were right. They were right back then and they're right now. So here, because that manifestation, as you said, we generally as a culture look at as the things that I want, possessions. Or achievements, become a doctor, that is it. And then what we miss is, and now go on.
Yeah, because we're focused on the wrong things. And as an example, again, I really thought if I got all these things and I would get all this positive affirmation, that I would just, oh man, this is cool. I am great. And the problem was the driver of my behavior, which I think unfortunately is for a lot of people, is insecurity and shame. And you were trying to overcome that. And you believe that you do these things and then you've overcome it because everybody's telling you you're so great.
Right.
And of course, that is a completely false narrative. And in the middle of all of this, where I had everything and I had all my friends telling me I had everything, like I said, I was more miserable than I had ever been in my life. So once I lost all this money, I went through this period of reflection. And what I realized was that my actions were out of fear and shame and ego because everything was focused on me. Now, don't get me wrong, I was a doctor, but I was a good doctor, and I would like to believe I still am, but it was all about I'm a good doctor. I'm a neurosurgeon. It wasn't about I am a doctor who cares for people, and that's my primary goal. It was look at me, I achieved this, and therefore you should admire me. And were you going to say? Go ahead.
Well, I'm interested in that. I remember, back in the day, Dave Ramsey talking about money. And money, he said, is just it's not good or bad. It's just money. It's like a brick. You can build an orphanage, or you can throw it through somebody's window. And in this, with manifesting, which we're going to get into some of the dynamics that you outline, I want to, in the book, and to say, okay, the manifesting, this is a scientific tool. I mean, we can use this and we can benefit it. So I can take it, I can do the work, and I can get the Porsche or the mansion or whatever. That's feasible. I can put this into practice and do it. But now you just said it. If the driver is incorrect, that probably dictates whether it's going to fulfill me. If I get the mansion out of fear and proving, and it's all self-serving, self-focused, probably not going to fulfill me. If I get it with the thought of, gosh, I want to fill this with love and life and light, that's a different driver. So we're back here and say, okay, manifesting is one thing. It's a tool. Over here, the drive is, which, that's the show. What drives you? The drive is going to pertain to whether it fulfills or not. Is that real? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the problem is that if your sole motive is self-interest, that becomes, I think, the problem. And that's sort of where I was. The other aspect is that when you're so self-focused, oftentimes you leave those around you empty because you're not there for them. Your interest is, how can I get what I want? And so ultimately what happened was I was, as you pointed out, sitting in this mansion by myself, a beautiful, 7,000 square foot house overlooking the bay in Newport Beach with these cars in the garage. And it was interesting because what I realized was exactly what I said. It was all about me. And when I shifted the narrative and said, well, what I missed was that, and if you look at how we evolved as a species, we're one of the few species that our offspring require us to take care of them for 10, 15 years. So we have this genetic imperative to do that. And the thing is, why would we do that? Well, because when we care, and this is both time and resources, when we care to alleviate the suffering, if you will, of our offspring, they're hungry, they're in pain, etc., then we're rewarded. The way we're rewarded is that we have different neurotransmitters, and the one probably most of the audience knows about is oxytocin, which is the love, the bonding, the caring hormone. And that stimulates our reward centers and our pleasure centers. So when you care for another, you actually feel good about yourself. And obviously, if you're caring for somebody, they feel good. And the problem is that when you're working from the lens of insecurity or fear, this is stimulating your flight, fight, or freeze response, our sympathetic nervous system. And that actually limits our ability to be thoughtful, generous, kind, or to care, which ultimately limits our ability to manifest what's important. And that was the key thing that I learned in this period of reflection, because I went over all these lessons this woman taught me, and I realized that it was all about me.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was, here I had gone from rags, if you will, to riches. And now I was back at the rags point of view. But what happened was, in communication with my lawyer, after sort of this period of reflection, he said, Jim, I have great news for you. You had created this trust for charity, and actually we never filed the final paperwork. So all the stock you put in this trust, you don't have to give away. Now, of course, it was very tempting to go, great, fantastic, okay, I'm whole again. But reflecting on this, I decided to go ahead and give it away. And that ended up being $30 million. Wow. Now, the extraordinary thing about that was it allowed me to set up health clinics all over the world, blood banks, programs for adolescents affected by AIDS or HIV, programs for the disabled, endowed chairs at universities, research programs. And it had really a far-reaching effect. But the thing about it was, the reason I made that decision was it also liberated me, because the driver of my behavior was poverty. And so many people are afraid they don't have enough. And sadly, what happens is when they get enough, they don't become more generous. Oftentimes they become more selfish, and they look through the lens of scarcity. And so by giving all of this away, I no longer had that monkey on my back. But I learned something that was amazing. And what was amazing was that by doing that, I went from rags again, but to riches in a very different way. And I don't want anybody to get the impression that even at my worst, I was particularly suffering, because I was a neurosurgeon getting paid more than 99.9% of people. So I was never going to be in the street or in a homeless shelter or in a food line. But the aspect of it, though, that I think is important is that I changed my focus. It was no longer about me. It was about how can I be of service to others. And this is our natural state. This is how we evolved as a species, to care for others. And what happens is, when you care for others, it shifts engagement of our sympathetic nervous system to our parasympathetic nervous system. And this is often called the rest and digest system. And what happens when that system is activated is that you do look through this lens of generosity, openness, kindness, thoughtfulness. And when you do that, as I said, your pleasure and reward centers are activated, but it also has a profound effect on your peripheral physiology. Your blood pressure is lowered. Your heart rate variability is decreased, which is a good thing. Your blood pressure is lowered. Your immune system is boosted. The production of inflammatory proteins is diminished, and inflammatory proteins are frequently associated with chronic disease states. Your stress hormones like cortisol are decreased. And it has all of these incredibly profound effects. And as a result, though, when you look through the lens of manifesting in the context of how can I be of service, this is where the magic happens. Yeah. Because as we were talking about earlier, there is no outside force that creates your life. There's no thing in the universe that says Jim was a nice guy, therefore he gets X, Y, or Z. What people forget is the immense power they have in themselves to actually train their mind. And this is this concept of neuroplasticity. The challenge, though, is that what we want to learn is how do we maximize the ability to manifest our desires in this world.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, number one, if you have a guide or a coach, that helps everything. It's like if you're starting to run, it's wonderful to have somebody who is a runner or who is an elite athlete who says, look, you have to start here and you have to do this, 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 and you'll get to this level. And the thing is that when you're self-focused, this has a negative effect on what we call these cognitive brain networks, which are these areas in the brain that work together in many ways to help you manifest. And if you are in the state of fear or anxiety, or you've stimulated your sympathetic nervous system, that diminishes their effectiveness. And so on the one hand, yes, I was able to get all those things, but there was nothing at the end of that rainbow. There was no pot of gold. There was just misery. When I changed how I saw the world, and it was through the lens of compassion and kindness, that's when you were able to maximally manifest. And that, thankfully, is what happened to me. And as the Dalai Lama says, he says, if you want to make others happy, be compassionate. If you want to be happy, be compassionate.
I want to come to something you said a second ago. And it's something that's important to me personally. And I know a lot of my audience is, because we do have a good faith-based, component here. And that statement of, hey, there's nobody out there that's going to just make everything happen for you. I mean, that hits to the core of my, past religious roots. And so I want to bring that into the conversation, because that was part of the manifesting thing that turned me off. Is it was like this hoodoo guru thing, the law of attraction. You just think and believe, and Santa Claus is going to leave it on your doorstep, whether that's Santa Claus, the universe, or Santa Claus, God, Jesus, Buddha, whatever it is. And I didn't like that. Now, there's so many paths we can go down, and I don't want to get lost and away from the topic here of manifesting. But as we look at, again, that's what I appreciated. Here's the tagline, the neuroscience of manifestation and how it changes everything. That probably a good relator is, from a religious, especially a Christian standpoint, there's often been this friction between evolution, which I never understood, or at least not later as I got later into life, and hopefully a little more open-minded and I hope mature, wise. I don't know. We'll see. Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly.
But I looked and thought, I don't know why believing in God negates evolution. I think God can create science. I personally have faith that God did create science. And so as I look at these aspects of manifestation that you've laid out, that we'll get into some of the details on vibrations and frequencies and whatever, I look and go, it doesn't have anything contrary to God's design and natural law to me, if you believe in that. Again, so if you believe that, hey, it's just all science, or you believe, no, God created it. Okay, so God created science and these aspects of manifestations of we bring forth the things that we think about. That's super old. As a man thinketh. And if I look at the sayings of Buddha or of Jesus, they're very much in line with this. They're trying to get our thinking right. So you're gonna create what you have, what you put your faith in, what you put your expectations in. And so in this, I look at that, and I've kind of gotten out of the religious thing of thinking, okay, I'm just waiting and praying and trying to do the right thing so that Jesus, Santa Claus, Daddy Warbucks will bless my life. And so again, I want those folks of the faith that I am to say, I don't believe I'm God. I personally don't. I believe there is a God. and that he calls me to wisdom. And this to me is wisdom. And that most of us, as you said, have a negativity bias, and we're going around in what is it? Flight, freeze, and what was the other one?
Flight, fright, or freeze.
Flight, thank you.
Flight, or freeze.
I know. I always get confused.
The three Fs. The three Fs.
We go around in that worrying and concern. I think it's not biblical if you want to go that route, and it's not helpful on the scientific route. Either way, we're going to create and make behaviors and attract, if we want to use the attraction aspect, what we think about. And I'm tempted to go down that road. I know it's later on in your book. I went through chapter by chapter, but you talk about, vibration and resonance and synchronicity of things. I really appreciate your analogies. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because as you mentioned earlier, there's a subset of people who go down the path of woo-woo and pseudoscience.
Yep.
And the reality is that in every one of these things, there's a kernel of truth, but then they wrap it around a narrative that often is self-serving for them or for other people. And therein lies the problem. And in fact, if you look at a lot of people who throw out the woo-woo pseudoscience stuff, they're selling you something, right? And again, as I said, the practices that they describe can be extraordinarily beneficial and allow you to manifest. The question is, does it put you in the situation where you are truly manifesting things that will help you be a better human being and live in this world and fulfill your potential? Or are they going to create a situation where you are driven by ego and you are separating yourself from other people? And as I mentioned earlier, as a species, we evolved to care, to be compassionate towards others. And when we are in that mode, our physiology works its best. There's every bit of evidence that is irrefutable that when you look through that lens, it has a profound effect on your physiology to the point it actually makes you healthier, both mentally and physically, but it also increases your longevity. And I'm sure you've heard of the blue zones, or the work by Bob Waldinger, the 85-year-old Harvard adult development study, which many people talk as the happiness longevity study. But in those situations, the key component actually to both happiness and longevity and health have to do with caring for other people. And that's also the situation when these brain networks work their best. When you are in a calm mode, when you're open, when you're thoughtful, when you're generous. It does not work as effectively when you're in the fear mode or you're anxious.
Can we talk about the physiology?
Sure.
Because I appreciate that. We think about this as such a mental thing. And I'm going to reference someone you referenced in the book, Lynn Twist. So we had her on the show here talking about living a committed life, devoting yourself to a greater purpose, which of course she is renowned as a humanitarian for doing. But it's interesting, James, on the show with me, I don't remember the context. I just remember what she said. She said, you know what? Your mood precedes you in everything you do. When you walk into a room, and I said, I wasn't correcting her, but I was just trying to understand. I said, you kind of mean your attitude? She said, no, I think you can have a certain attitude, but it's your mood, it's your presence, your physiology. And so just to the list that you gave in, when I come in, well, heck, when we came, we're talking remotely. I'm in Colorado. I don't know where you are. Where are you, James?
Mountain View.
Okay. All right. You're in California. So That's right. Pacific time. So we're a little ways apart. And yet, as soon as we flip this on and look at each other and talk to each other, I believe in a moment, we kind of feel each other out. And I can feel, are you a generous guy? Are you just here to go get this thing over with? How long is this thing going to take? Or are you interested in me and really giving thought to, I feel that right away in heart. I feel that mood. I feel that physiology. So we manifested the spirit of the conversation right off the bat, and we're continuing to. And that's you could say it's a mental thing, but it feels like a physiological. Well, you talked about frequency, that we are going to come across, and right away we're going to resonate or not.
No, that's right. And the thing about humans is we also have this unique ability not only to perceive these vibrational states, and again, that's another term that is often in the woo-woo pseudoscience space. But
feels scientific to me at this point, especially after reading your book.
But yeah, the reality is, as an example, your heart emanates bioenergy. Or bioelectrical or vibratory energy, and about 5 or 6 feet outside of your body. But I'm sure you've been in the experience, which you were in somewhat just describing. You walk into a room, and there's a person there who has this presence, this energy about them, and you suddenly relax. You feel comfortable. You feel they're looking at you eye to eye. They're not looking down at you. They're interested in what you're saying. They're thoughtful, and it's immediate. We are attuned to other people in this way. Just as if you walk into a room and you have a guy with his arms crossed who has a scowl on their face, and their energy is all off and very negative. And I'm sure you've also had experience with people, we call them energy vampires, right?
Yeah.
And it is, this is really true. And the thing is, though, what's amazing about it is, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with the Stoic philosophers, but there's Epictetus, who was a slave. And what he said, which I think is very powerful, he says, I cannot control my external circumstances, but I can control how I react to them. And in some ways, this is what we're really fundamentally talking about, is how do we react to events? How do we take back the power that we give away? As an example, we're talking about this magical thing outside of ourselves that somehow fixes everything that's wrong in our lives. The reality is you have immense power within yourself to change how your brain is wired. And that may sound fantastical or impossible, but it's truth.
It's true. And I feel like if we think about it, we've all experienced it. We know that. I see it. It was probably more acute to me, James, with my kids than myself initially. To look at your kid and you can see them, and they get nervous, they get fearful, and they do terrible on the test. You know that they know the stuff. So what did they manifest that? Well, I think, call it what you want, but they caused, they had a personal, and we're not going to say it's their fault, but it's their responsibility. They're young. We're not, though. We have the ability to look at that. And you use some great stories in your book, Anula. You talk about that, and that she's taken the MCAT trying to become a doctor, and she's terrified. And that terror comes out, and she does poorly. And when she changes the thoughts, the expectations, she does the work to grow her confidence. I mean, you use whatever word is, you're comfortable with. Then she goes in and empowers her brain and confidence, and she does great. That's the science, I feel like, of manifestation, that takes out any woo-woo, or even I'm going to take God and set him aside here too, to think, I think God's looking at me going, dude, there's wisdom. This is part of it, to get your mind in order, to breathe deep, to meditate, to take care of yourself, to have faith. That's why it's called a faith, not a proof. To have faith in yourself, change your expectations. You will change your results. Now that seems pretty matter of fact. I am still, and if you're game for it, I am interested in the vibrational aspect, which I know for most people gets into woo-woo stuff. But I feel like you've used the word irrefutable. I mean, we are electric beings. If I start to have a heart problem, they're going to come in here with a defibrillator. They're not going to come in with a Bible. They're not going to come in with a food or whatever. They're going to come in with an electric shock. I'm an electric being. And back to that mood, the vibration that I put off, having resonance or not, feels, is it fair to say it's irrefutable? It feels irrefutable.
No, I don't think there's any question. Again, as I said, what so often happens, though, is, and this is even, I think, true of religion, over thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
experientially, we have learned certain truths that now neuroscience or science has been able to validate. The
Okay.
challenge has been, though, that oftentimes, based on the culture, the period of time, it gets wrapped around a dogma. In the case
Yes.
of woo-woo and pseudoscience, this is what's happened with manifestation. We talked about Hermetic philosophy. We talked about the New Age type of mystical or metaphysical things that they throw onto this, but there are certain truths there. And even as an example, if you look at religion, once you get, and we evolved obviously from the nuclear family to tribes. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason that happened was because in a harsh environment, we needed to work together to survive. But the problem was once you get above about 150 people, there's something called, I think it's Dumbarton's number, that you can't track people after that, right?
Mm.
On a one-to-one, you know everybody, but once you start getting a larger group, you can't observe whether somebody's breaking the rules or putting your tribe at risk. And some people would argue then that this result, and the other aspect of this is we're the only species, and probably not the only, but the primary species that has a perception of our finite existence, right? And that creates a lot of fear and anxiety. So if you create a omniscient being who is all seeing, all knowing, and if you break the rules, then you don't have everlasting life, then that's a big motivator for you to do the right thing. Okay. And it also decreases the angst or existential crisis of our finite existence. Now, I don't want to get into a debate, and also it depends on what you call God, but I don't think there's any reason to debate whether there's a Jesus Christ or a Buddha or all of these other entities. The point of the story is that there has been knowledge that has been gained through experience, which science has been proven to be factual. And part of it is what you were talking about, vibration or oscillation. And as I mentioned in the book and give a variety of references, this is well demonstrated. We use the example of people having energy that they carry with them. But you know, the energy from your heart emanates 5 or 6 feet outside of you. And another example is, I'm sure you're aware, if a group of women in this example end up living together, oftentimes their menstrual periods line up. And
It's profound, and you use to take it to a less, goodness, a more tactile, maybe even example. You use that of putting two pendulums on different sides of the wall or something like that, just through
or
vibration over time.
metronomes. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
They will eventually oscillate together, and that shows you this power that is there that we don't see, but in fact it exists. And so there is this energy that connects all of us, and you don't have to put into the context of a magical being. We may not know what causes it, but we do know it exists. But we also know that we have immense agency that allows us to change our brains to either benefit ourselves or not. And I think this is really what we're getting at, is all of us on some level are manifesting every day. But for most people, they don't do it effectively. As an example, I mean, I'm sure you'll say, God, I'd really like to buy that house. Well, saying I'd really like that to happen, you sort of put something there. But unless you do the work, and what we know changes how your brain and these cognitive brain networks interact, you're not going to maximize the potential to get that or achieve that. And when I say that, what I also mean is some people get the impression that, well, I want this. Okay, now it needs to happen immediately, and that's all I need to do. Or I wanted this, and geez, I wished for a red Porsche, and I got a green one. That's horrible. What happened here? Or, I wanted this situation to occur, and geez, it didn't happen in the time frame. Or geez, it wasn't really working exactly. I got something approximating it. And the problem isn't that there are no guarantees here. What we're talking about is how do you maximize your ability to make it happen? It's like, as an example, whether you're an athlete, a race car driver, and you've done all the work, it doesn't mean that you're going to win every time. It means that you have maximized your ability for that possibility to occur. And that's really what we're talking about here.
And perfect. That because we tend to, back to your negativity bias, I think we have a human propensity to sabotage so much that's kind of the natural, as you said, that's our natural, evolutionary to survive. We've got to be aware of the threats. And so we're going around constantly aware of the threats with the worry, with the concern that helped us, escape the tiger that was going to eat us or the marauding, villagers from the nearby village or whatever. But so we have to be different than our nature to maximize, to put a positive spin. And when I look at this, it's got me so much around our expectations. I really like the word still of our confidence. I mean, I feel that come across. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that we talk about in manifestation is limited beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of confidence, right?
Yes.
This is when you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, it's not going to happen. And you have to believe. And this is the basis for, as an example, the way hypnosis works or the way the placebo effect works is this absolute belief and confidence that this possibility exists for you. When you have that absolute belief, that changes how your brain gets wired. But I do want to mention one other thing that a lot of people don't appreciate. And I mentioned in some ways how I grew up. So many of us have been in situations where we carry baggage from our childhoods. Mm-hmm. And we don't appreciate how that baggage impacts our adulthood. And whether it's the job we take, whether it's the relationships we pick, whether it's how we interact with others, that baggage sits there. And for many people, they are not aware that that's actually the driver. And what they're doing is not at a conscious level.
The beliefs we have, which you talk about in the book, that's the one that rings my bell.
No, and that's exactly right. Well, unless you have insight and self-awareness of that truth, you can't change it. And you see people who will say, well, I've been married 3 times and I always pick the same partner. They were a drug addict and abusive. Well, if you go back in their childhoods, you may find that they had an abusive alcoholic parent and, they would abuse them and be really mean. And then they'd come and go, I love you. Well, now you're tying these negative behaviors with love and bonding. And then that impacts and gets embedded in you. So then you get confused about what love is, right? Yeah. And this is why so many people can't get out of their rut, because you have to sit down and say, how did I get here, right? And when you're going to manifest, you have to think about that. What have I already manifested for good and for bad? And if you look back and you see these recurring patterns of behavior that are actually very negative for you, then you can change them. And that's really one of the parts to start manifesting. And once you're able to get there, then you have to understand or clarify your intentions. What is it that you really want to manifest? And I think this is another place where people get confused. If you come out of an environment of poverty or scarcity and you buy into the traditional capitalist narrative of success, then naturally you want to have all the accruements of success. And because you believe that success will equal happiness,
Right.
and it doesn't oftentimes. And this is the difference between what we call hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. Hedonic happiness is seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, and it's also ego fulfillment. And this type of happiness is shallow and transitory. And this is why, in some ways, you have to keep doing it. That's why, well, okay, I drove this car. God, that's not giving me the same high now. I need to get a better car so people will look at me more and admire me more. And then, a few weeks pass and then you get, well, that's not really doing it anymore. I have to go to the next level. And in some ways, it's like an addiction because you're so driven to get these drops of dopamine by showing off to people that you're able to do these things. And again, it's not helping you at all. And it's not achieving deep, sustained happiness. What gives you deep, sustained happiness, or what we call eudaimonic happiness? And the only thing that does that, frankly, is to be of service to others.
The deeper work. When I read that in your book, James, it, for whatever reason, it made me think of our current fad reality of, just a snack, a quick snack, an energy, get an energy bar, get something to go on, instead of planning, shopping, cooking a meal, sitting down and enjoying it, or fast food. I guess we could say that fast food, drive by, get it, eat on the run. And it's a quick happiness. It feeds that quick appetite that you said that shallow appetite. It's not deeply fulfilling at all.
And it's transitory, right? And I think that's a great analogy, because you are trading for something that has no true sustenance. It's like sugar. It gives you a transitory high, but it has every one of these horrible negative effects, versus a real meal that may or may not have protein in it or meat, but it has all the other vitamins, minerals, fiber that actually are what we grew up with or evolved with as a species, and it has the most profound effect, and it sustains your blood sugar in the sense that it is long-lasting because it releases it slowly, and it actually is good for you. And I think that's really a great analogy, and that's what we're talking about here, is training your mind not to go for the quick snack that has no sustenance and leaves you hungry, but to use the techniques to actually fill you with something that stays with you and is healthy for you.
And we could, again, back to your story, you had the toys in the garage, you had the thing, you had those things, but you didn't have the deeper one. And we're in a culture now where, so we talk about fast food in regards to a great meal, a Thanksgiving meal in essence. I mean, we could say the same thing with the rise in porn right now, as opposed to an actual relationship and actual good sex, or virtual reality. And instead of me getting on a mountain bike or going 3 days recently, almost to Utah with a bunch of guys and, going nuts and having some danger and some adrenaline or whatever. Well, I was just in Vegas not long ago, and you go by the little shops and people are sitting in chairs that are rocking around with these VR glasses, and they're screaming and yelling, and feels like a good time. Can't believe that it gives you quite the same thing as actually doing whatever it is you're doing in real life. But we're looking for those quick fixes.
Yep. And that's human nature, unfortunately. And that's why you have to be aware of your nature, because the brain is lazy and it wants the quickest, cheapest way to get where it thinks it wants to be. And many of the things we're talking about are demonstrating that reality. So the question is, I mentioned we're all manifesting. How do we manifest the most efficient way, which gives you the greatest likelihood of actually manifesting what you need?
Let's go there. I'll come back to, you said the brain is lazy. I want to come back to something that was significant out of your book. I did want to bring up real quick, James, the old quote. I just want people to think about this because everybody's heard this and they've nodded it. We're talking about the literal science of it. Henry Ford, however long ago, said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And what gets me is that was a self-focused thing, right? And in looking at this manifesting and the vibrations and the mood and the things that we've talked about here, that whether I think I can or I think I can't also informs you. When we get on here to do this, if I'm sitting here feeling nervous, we just had somebody on, Anna Papelia. She was talking about interviewing, and the new science of interviewing is what she called. But just that, think about that. If I'm hiring somebody and I've got 5 candidates walk through the door, I know right away who feels confident, who's got a big ego, who's terrified. I mean, it comes across, and that's what we're talking about. So, and I respond to that. I want somebody who's confident, who I feel like is humble, also is teachable. And I'm going to get that in the first 5 seconds for the most part. I don't even need to talk to them. To me, that's a heart of manifesting. I can feel their inner belief system, in essence, which is so much of what it feels like we're talking about. We're talking about that's what you bring it to. We're talking about the inner wiring.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you said that, because you have, though, and as you said, the person you were interviewing is talking about the new science of that, because we can look at things at a superficial level and get information, but there are nuances to all of this, which gives you the real insight. As an example, there's maybe some person who's a bit insecure, but they're trying to hide that from being overconfident, yet they could be an incredible employee. So you have to sort of dig a little deeper and see how they respond. And then you have people who seemingly are terrified because of, again, that inner voice.
Yeah.
Yet if you build them up and give them a little bit of confidence, they're extraordinary. So there are subtleties there. But as you point out, at the end of the day, you are the decider. And you mentioned this Henry Ford quote, which is very apropos. And when you have negative self-talk, what I say is it's like laying down a brick every day to build a prison for yourself where the walls get higher and it gets darker inside, because you're limiting what you believe. And what's so sad is, and I'm sure you've had this experience, you may have had a dream or an aspiration where you shared with family members or friends, and they go, you're never going to do that. That's not possible. What they're telling you is they're not able to do that because they've told themselves they're not being able to do that. They certainly have no right to tell you. But the sad thing is, many people believe when somebody tells them that, especially somebody who they think loves them or cares about them. And then this creates these limited beliefs that stop them from manifesting, if you will, the life that they want to have. Yeah. The other thing I want to say is that I'm not arguing against material possessions, sitting there saying,
sure,
you manifest and you do this and you help all these people and you live on the street or you live in a hovel and you don't have enough food. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that being of service to others is the greatest gift you can give to others and yourself. And when you look through the world through that lens, you actually oftentimes change what you think you want to what you need. And what I mean by that is you realize that the possessions we're talking about, while they're wonderful, and listen, I live in a very nice house. I drive a yellow Porsche. There's nothing wrong with that. But the difference is, though, that those things aren't who I am. And if they go away tomorrow, while on some level I might be sad, they're completely irrelevant to my happiness at the end of the day. They were great while I had them. I have immense gratitude for being in a position to obtain or attain that level of success, if you will, but I don't need them. What sticks with you, what makes you a human being, what makes you self-actualized is being of service in this world. And that gives you this very deep sense of fulfillment and happiness. And when you're in that mode, all these brain networks that I talk about in the book work at their best, as well as our autonomic nervous system, or the vagus nerve, which then gets pushed into the place where we should be all the time, which is engagement of our parasympathetic nervous system. And that is where our physiology works at its best.
That, James, I want to come to that because you mentioned, dreams and aspirations a moment ago. And, a key part of your book that you start off with is just looking at what we want. I mean, that's the premise of my book. What drives us? What do we want? And the reality that most of us are not very clear. And that's been a big part of my story, where I have, some stories kind of like yours of a lot of achievements, a lot of things, and didn't know where I was going or why. So looking at what we want and realizing that we often don't know. And then further, it's one thing, and you talk about this some in your book, it's one thing to say we want something. Ask somebody, would you like to win the lottery? Well, sure. Are you going to buy a ticket? Do you really believe that it's possible? Well, no, few people do that. I don't know anybody who buys lottery tickets. Somebody who's listening does, but there's so many things we say we want, but we're not really setting ourselves up. What do we really expect? And to come back to the word you use, believe, that feels like such a key tenet of manifesting. Like you said, we often are worrying, we're in fear, and we believe something bad is going to happen, or we're concerned about that, as opposed to over here, when we actually believe this good thing can happen and really wrap ourselves around that, which is so hard with something that hasn't happened yet. You tell incredible stories in your book. You talk about the character Anula in there. You talk about Jim Carrey a lot, where he looked and repeated, I am a great actor. I am a great actor. I am going to provide great value, and somebody's going to write me a check for $10 million. Most people have heard that. And he recited it, and he literally got himself to believing that. And I want everybody to hear that, because look at the thing that you want, and now look in the mirror and go, do you really believe that you can do what it takes or have that thing?
No, I think that's right. And I would add to that story, though, prior to this epiphany, he would get in front of an audience with the belief that I want this from this audience, right? I want this for myself, versus saying, I am here before the audience to give them something that makes their life better. And that is the key difference here. He had a change in his perception between I versus them. I am their servant, if you will, versus you need to give me this. And that changed, and it made him understand this process of manifesting. And then it gave him an unshakable belief in his ability. And I'll give you another example, which just slipped my mind.
Well, I want to we had Michael Jr. Michael Jr. is a well-known comedian on the show. He shared a similar sentiment. He's a comedian. He's up on stage. He's supposed to get a laugh. He said it changed his life when he turned that around and said, no, I'm not here to get a laugh. I'm here to give a laugh. This is an offering.
Exactly. And actually, I remember the story. I'm sure Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, right? Mm-hmm. He tells a story. He would get angry because, he's always asked to play Stairway to Heaven. And, he's had all this material since then, and it used to anger him to get in front of an audience because it's about me. I want to play my music that I like now. I want to play the new stuff. And then he had, again, a mind shift that separated or changed that anger to an understanding of a deeper meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And that was that this song was so powerful to so many people, and it whether it influenced a relationship, a decision, a friendship, people held this as a reminder of these incredible experiences that they had, and they wanted to hear that song again. And once he understood this, that shift occurred where he was actually happy and had gratitude that they were asking this of him. And this playing it again for the 10 millionth time was no longer a burden, but a joy. And he did play his new music, but he honored these other people and gave them something. And that's really the key to the very essence of manifesting. Because once you make that shift, what you are receiving is oftentimes more powerful than anything you even thought you wanted.
It takes the pressure off as well. You know, my wife used to talk about it as navel gazing, when I'm just concerned with myself. And then when I step back and go, I mean, I can do that. All right, I've done that. Thank goodness it's been a while, but with the show, and I'm so concerned about, you know, doing a good show and appealing to everybody. When I step back and go, wait, what am I doing this for? If I just want downloads, I should talk about crime and sex. Well, obviously that's not my point. I'm here to talk about things.
We're not going to talk about crime and sex. What?
Well, we can go there if you, it's whatever you want to manifest, you know.
We don't need to manifest that. There's enough of that in the world without you and I trying to manifest more.
That's fair. But that coming back to, wait, what am I doing? And I do have to do that once in a while. Go, hold on. Especially when I start feeling, you know, anxious about it, step back. What am I doing? And I am here to do something I think is worthwhile. For me, it's the stuff that I would want my kids to listen to. They're a great barometer of this. Okay, James, I don't want to miss this though. You mentioned something, and this is chapter 6 in your book, step 4. It's called Embed the Intention in Your Subconscious. You said something a second ago that just reminded me of it. And I want to make sure that we cover this. And you talk about, or my notes, you know, the miserly brain. Okay. And this is why it jumped out at me, that 2 reasons: how often we hear a great message. We're at a seminar, we hear something, or we listen to a podcast, or we read something, and it's just the Holy Grail. Holy smokes, that resonates with me. Or we have an idea, something like, oh my gosh, I've got a new revelation, a new idea. And then a week later, what happened to it? Where'd it go? Okay, that's one analogy. And then the other one is that thing that I know that I could do, like writing a book. Oh my gosh, I'm going to write this thing. I want to do that. It's important work. I care. It's exciting. And yet the days go by and I've just kind of busied myself with stuff. And I'm looking at why didn't I do that? Okay, that's where I got hit with, you brought the science to it, that my brain is created to conserve energy. And so I just got this big revelation, a big bright spot. Again, think about you're at a conference and you heard a message, or you listen to this podcast and you heard it and it's so great. And you conceive of it, but then right now your brain's going, okay, we're going to stick to what we know. And what you're saying is, unless we actually say, if the brain is not sufficiently familiar with our goal, it will reject it by default. The new info is just too heavy an energy lift. Folks, you can rewind that, because that showcases to me why there's so many things that I don't engage with. There's exciting things that I want to do that I don't do. You just gave me the science for it. And the solution, you said, is I have to repeat it to myself. I have to get familiar with it. And back to the story you use of Anula, when she finally I think got got the certificate or whatever that says she was going to make it into med school. She had been envisioning it and repeating it so often, she says it actually kind of felt familiar. That was huge to me.
Yeah. So let me even back up a little bit to use the analogy or the statement I said earlier, which was, we carry baggage in our lives and it gets imprinted in us. Mm-hmm. And this is why somebody's, been through 3 marriages to a repeatedly abusive people. That is deeply imprinted. And until you change that, the brain is going to choose what's familiar, right? And the known for many people is less fearful, even though it can be painful, than the unknown.
Yeah. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Right. So you're going to fall back on that. And in some ways, this is the same thing in that it's taking the easiest way out. And so how do you embed something in your brain? And fundamentally, this is the process of neuroplasticity. It's intention and repetition, or again, this thing about what fires together, wires together.
Yeah.
How do you embed those intentions into your subconscious? And this gets us actually now talking about these cognitive brain networks, right? And how they work. So these are these areas in the brain that are not necessarily discrete, and that actually parts of them may overlap with other processes or other networks. But how do you embed something into your subconscious? What a lot of people don't appreciate is that through our 5 sensory organs, which actually give us the information to, if you will, be humans, because they're processing all this data, we get about 10 million bits of information a second from our sensory organs. And so while 99.99% of that goes into maintaining body homeostasis or bodily functions at an unconscious level, we actually have the ability to, on a conscious level, process about 50 to 100 bits of information. That information that we have, we can then embed. So it's a choice of what we're embedding. And so if you have an intention, how do you embed it? And this is a process of something called value tagging, right? Yeah. How do you make that intention salient? And we have something called the salience network. We have an attention network. We have the executive control network, and we have the default mode network. So beginning with the default mode network, this is the network that is engaged when we are mind wandering or daydreaming. But the critical point is it's self-referential, and in that process, we are thinking about what we want or who we want to be. Now, all of that's great in the sense of daydreaming, but then how do you take it to the next level to actually manifest your intention? And that's through this process of value tagging. So first you have to create the intention, and then you have to make it salient so that it is tagged as this is important. And when that happens, then it allows your attention network to be focused on that, and the salience network then to say, well, how do I make this happen? And it has access to all of our sensory processes to look around and say, what do I need to do to make this happen? And I'm sure you've been at a party that's very noisy, and if somebody mentions your name in the din of all of this noise, you immediately turn to it. And the reason is because your identity is so deeply embedded in you that your salience network is always attuned to when somebody mentions your name. I'll give you another example. As a neurosurgeon, I deal with people with relatively unusual diseases. And as an example, I'll tell somebody, well, you have hydrocephalus. And they'll go, I've never heard of that before. And for the audience, that's water on the brain, if you will. But they'll say, I've never heard of that before. I'll see them 6 weeks or 2 months later, and they go, the most amazing thing has happened. I've met 5 people who have the exact same thing.
Yes.
Well, why is that? Because you have value tagged it. It has gotten your attention. It has embedded in the salience network, which you can say it's sort of this bloodhound looking for situations that are related to that. Another example is a few months ago, I was in a coffee shop, and I've been working on a particular idea. And again, noisy environment, yet above the din, I heard 2 people talking about the exact topic and project that I'm interested in. Well, I had embedded that. I had put a tag on it. And the subconscious was always looking for those situations where I might benefit from that information. And it defined and brought me to these 2 people who were talking about it.
I think about it. I was taught the reticular activator, that now you talked about having a yellow Porsche. We're all going to go out today and see a yellow Porsche. It's just going to mysteriously come there, but we're aware of it. You pointed out, and I wanted to pull it out too, that, even the things that happen. Like I just had a bunch of kids drive all night to go see the eclipse down in Texas, to see the full eclipse. Great experience. But, and I'm going to reference somebody that endorsed your book, Rick Hansen. So we had Rick on the show.
Mm.
He's the author of a few books, but his first one that was well known is Hardwiring Happiness. And to that, he's saying, hey, man, if you have a great experience, that's great. You're going to forget about it. Chances are you're going to forget about it. It's not going to change your life. It's not going to resonate, whatever. If you want to hardwire your happiness, you've got to really focus on it. You've got to come back and revisit it. And another statement that you wrote in the book, we teach our subconscious what is important through repetition and positive emotion. But I want to focus on the repetition. That's what we miss. The great epiphany happened, the exciting thing, the inspiration, the experience happened. And without repeating it, without dwelling on it, it's just going to go past. And again, I want to point out what you said. This is the brain's doing what it's supposed to do for your best survival. It's saying, hey, that's really cool, but we're going to make sure you take care of the have-tos down here. And until we train it to go, no, this is important. And the next day we say, this is important. And we say, look, I'm going to achieve this. I want to arrive at this. I'm going to expect and believe it. Until we do that, the brain's not paying attention. It's throwing it out until we finally reach what? Critical mass.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And getting back to your analogy about God, there's a quote, God only helps those who help themselves. This isn't one where you sit thinking, I want that, and then it just leaves your mind, and somehow you magically think that it's going to happen. This takes work, and the work is embedding this into your subconscious. And you just mentioned the critical things that are important. You write it down. You write that down. You read it to yourself. You read it aloud. You rewrite it. You visualize, and this is what athletes do. They visualize what they want to accomplish as an athlete. They see themselves running the race. They see themselves crossing the finish line. And it starts out as maybe a foggy, unclear image. But the more they embed that image into their brain, that window they're looking through starts getting clear and clear until it is absolutely clear. And this is, I talk about the flow state in the book as well, right?
Yep.
Once you've visualized it so clearly, then you can get into the flow state, if you will, where you've now activated all these processes that we were just talking about. And then it gets to the level of what we call the executive control network. And I use the analogy of it being the CEO. It's the one that finally says, okay, now I authorize this to happen. We're going to make it happen now, right?
Yeah.
And that's how the process works. But it takes work. It's not like, okay, I thought about it. Geez, manifestation doesn't work. It does take work. It takes energy. It takes time. It takes repetition. It takes visualization. And if you do those things, and again, look through the lens of being of service, that is how you manifest.
I want to stay on this. And again, I appreciate you starting off and continually coming back to being of service, because all this, I could say this about drive. That's my topic, drive. We could talk about manifestation, that we can go out there and we can drive we can drive fast, we can drive hard, we can manifest and achieve X and find it unfulfilling if the drive is not pure and coming from a positive, place. Now to the dynamics of this manifestation, I think the one, we've got so much, something that sells really well in personal development is we'll help you take action, because everybody's sitting here with a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of desires, and they know they haven't taken action on, and they're probably frustrated with themselves. They feel guilty for it. And you're saying your brain, it's because your brain's doing what it's supposed to do until you rewire it through this repetition. And one of my dear friends would say, just doing the work. Nobody does the work. I want to reference in the book, Viktor Frankl, not this story. I think it goes along with him. If not, it was another concentration camp type perspective. And maybe the details of it, but it was these guys who were in there and they spent time. I think one of them knew how to golf, or a couple of them knew how to golf, and they taught the other ones mentally. They didn't have any sticks. They didn't have any balls. They didn't have any holes. They didn't have had nothing. They had a cell. But they went through the dynamics. This is how you do it. This is how you envision it. This is what it's going to look like. This is the form you use. And the story as it goes on is that these guys at some point years later ended up out of the concentration camp, and they had the opportunity to go play, and they played really well. Now, they didn't go win the PGA tournament right away, but they played really well. that if we take that into going, okay, here's what I really want to do, what I really want to achieve. And like them, every day I'm repeating the thought process, the concept. I see myself there. Again, you give some great stories in the book of people who actually did this to the point to where they couldn't, it's almost like they couldn't imagine not achieving it. That's just not where most of us come into these new things we want to achieve. We have negativity bias going on. We have worries, we have concerns. And I'm bothered by, and you use the word vision, and envisioning. Can we really see ourselves there? Because I hear so many people, and anytime I say that, I've experienced it too, where we say, I want it. But the truth is, I don't see myself there. That was me for probably 5 years with a book, James, until the day came and something mattered enough to me. And I could see myself doing the work, going through the process, writing a book. And I did. And it's sitting behind me now. But until that, I just didn't see myself there. And because I didn't see myself there, I didn't arrive.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And but I think one of the things we should mention, which people get lost on, and I'm sure you know B.J. Fogg, he wrote this book, Tiny Habits. What happens to there's one also called Atomic Habits, but right. What happens also to a lot of people is, they'll say, I want to become a runner. I'm going to run a marathon. And then, so day one, they go, okay, I'm going to run 5 miles. And they fail, right? Because they aren't doing the prep work or the work to actually make it happen. They've created a situation that is beyond what they're capable of doing at that moment. The fact that they can't do it at that moment, then they tell themselves, well, obviously it's not possible. And I would suggest that you take these little baby steps first. If you haven't had the mindset to achieve or to accomplish tasks, as an example, if you want to become a runner and you've never run before, and let's say you're overweight, you don't start out by saying, I'm going to run a mile. You start out by saying, I'm going to get up out of bed at 6 in the morning and I'm going to walk to the corner. That's it. And you do that a few times. Yeah. And then you may walk 2 blocks. But the thing is, you're waking up every day doing the work. And then each time you do it, you can say it gets clear or it gets easier, because every one of those steps you're taking is rewiring your brain, creating a habit, and you get comfortable with the habit, and then it builds on that. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, because if you're trying to do something and then suddenly you get into your head, oh, I'm obviously a loser, it's not possible, then that, again, as Henry Ford said, that becomes truth. If you're able to do it and go, hey, I didn't run 10 miles today or 5 miles or 1. I actually got up and showed up, walked a block. That's good enough for now. And so then you're not creating this path of failure, which is also, I think, very common.
Well, it really harkens me back to, and again, we've just followed the flow of the conversation because that's what I enjoy doing. Step 1, literally in your book, it's chapter 3. Step 1 is reclaim your power to focus your mind. I mean, all this is dependent on the ability, and you really kind of boil it down right at the beginning of that chapter, to self-agency of, can we have control, we must, of our minds, and in a simplistic aspect, not reacting, just environment, issues, thoughts, reacting to our own, fears, back to the negativity bias and our brain's propensity just to go down the wrong road of worry. Can we be present, which you did talk about at the beginning of this, and meditation is a big part of your book. Most of your chapters, or if all of them, I think, end with a meditation, but it's ultimately, can we stop, be aware, and have agency and say, no, this is where I want my mind to go. It's so easy to say. And to me, James, it continues to be one of the, I want to say mysteries, but I'm sometimes mystified at my ability to miss that and to go and to realize, oh my gosh, half the day is gone and I've just been mindlessly, I'm reacting. Stop.
Well, and I would say to the audience, sometimes you get pundits or people who sort of have a narrative. I know everything. I've accomplished everything. I have this great wisdom and insight. I'm
Right.
perfect. And, I'm teaching you losers how to do things. The reality is I struggle just like everyone else.
Yeah.
I am not perfect. I am a human being who has failed many, many times, but I get up every morning and I do the best I can to do the work. And again, it gets back to what you were saying. You have to show up and do the work. And it can be something as little as simply waking up and taking that half a block walk, because what that does is it shows you can change your brain. It shows you can create a habit. And that's doing is to reinforce your own self-agency and the reality that what happens to you is your choice. And this is, and I don't want to put this in the context like a lot of people do with law of attraction. Well, you put your energy out there and the universe didn't like you, so it didn't happen. So it's something you're a failure and it's your fault. No, what I'm saying is that you put yourself out there, you do these habits over and over again. You build the strength of that, and then you develop a truth that you have much more power than you ever thought possible. And now, once you have that belief that you are in control of so many things you don't even appreciate, then you can go to that next step.
Speak to that, because you mentioned that at some point in the book. I think it was early on. I'm gonna paraphrase, and you can say it correctly. But it was almost, or in my mind at least, it was almost a comparison to religion, that we can look at manifesting and look at it and go, man, if I didn't get the results, I didn't think right, I didn't manifest it right, I didn't conceive of it right. Kind of like with religion. Oh my gosh, I didn't get blessed because I didn't cross the right T's and dot the right I's and get the right points.
Sure.
And we can get into that same reference with manifesting.
No, that's right. And you could argue even that you didn't have enough faith.
Right. Yeah.
And it's interesting, there are some overlaps in the way we can use terminology to get what we want, but it comes from a metaphysical place versus understanding the science and the different techniques that are needed to make it happen.
Okay.
But the problem is, as you were just pointing out, if you say, well, God didn't want me to have it and it's my fault, well, that's not the right belief system. The right belief system is that every human being has agency, and every human being has the ability to change the wiring in their brain. And here are the techniques, if you follow them, will increase the likelihood of you rewiring your brain to get what you need to thrive as a human being. And I think people have to understand that at a very deep level and truly believe that. Because once you believe, we have innumerable instances. And this is not to say, well, I don't need cancer medication or radiation to treat my tumor, I'm just going to believe. No, that does not work. Now, it can boost your immune system. It can actually create an environment where many of these drugs or radiation or whatever may work better, but it's not going to magically take away your cancer. And my point being that, though having belief, in fact, we even know there's studies that show that, and you use the golf analogy, there are studies that show that if you think about weightlifting, building your muscles, you demonstrably can show an increase in muscle mass. Now, you're not going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you can increase your muscle mass. And it's just like, as an example, I'm sure you're familiar with Wim Hof, or what many monks have been able to accomplish through mind training. And we've used the term meditation, but that's fundamentally mind training. You can control your heart rate. You can control your body temperature. And this is the fundamental proof that this is in fact possible. And as an example, I have a good friend, and you might want to have him on your show because I think he would be an excellent guest. His name's Charlie Engle. Have you ever heard that name? Engle? What's the name of his book? Running Man is the name of his book. But the extraordinary thing about him is, here was a guy actually who was a crack addict who destroyed his life. And he changed how his brain worked. And now he's an ultra marathon runner. I mean, he's run across, like, I think the Sahara Desert. Like,
Okay.
he ran across Africa, I think 4,500 miles, right? And it's because he changed how he looked at the world and the possibilities that he believed in. And this has allowed him to do this. But while none of us are going to probably be him, or very few, or the next Wim Hof, we do have the ability, though, to accomplish extraordinary things far beyond what we thought were ever possible for us.
You mentioned Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. It was penned, I don't know, 1940 or 60 or something like that. And, in that, he talks about having that definiteness of purpose, that thing that you know that you want. And I think, number 2 or 3 or something like that is saying, this is what I will do. This is what I will provide to achieve. And especially from a monetary sense, this is how much money I want. This is what I will do specifically. That is of interest. One of the greatest things that I ever, manifested, that I achieved, was building a house for my family at a time when I didn't have the money. I didn't have the resources at all, didn't have the knowledge, and I didn't have the time. But I felt so convicted that my family needs this. I want my kids to live in the woods up in the mountains in Colorado now, not when I don't want to have the house and the place after they're gone. I want them to be in it. So it just has to happen. Another interesting part of this, we love the movies. I mean, everybody can think about the movie, the action adventure movie or whatever, where everybody's going along and then boom, something happens and the world's going to end, or death is imminent, or some catastrophe or whatever. And we love to watch somebody come through when they have to. We love that aspect of how often do we have these back to your wants. But yeah, we'd like it. It'd be nice. But are we really committed to it? Are we really, and then from that, do we create a structure? Because I look at my house and this is what we wanted. So what did we do? Yeah. We drew it out.
Yeah.
We drew it out. We had it created.
But I think you make an excellent point, because you don't see movies about the guy who has this goal. He sacrifices relationships, family, everything to reach the goal. Then he gets there and he's standing there by himself. And everybody's going, hey, that's great, man. You never see
True.
that, because
Totally
in fact, you sit there and you go, that is sad. That is horribly sad. And it gets to the fundamental point. Look at how you felt. I could just feel the energy you had when you made that statement. I needed to do this, but it wasn't, I needed to do this because I need to build a cabin or whatever, because people are going to look at me and tell me how great I am. You said, I did this for my family, right?
I could see it, James. I could see, when we bought the land, and I could see where the house was going to go. And then when it first framed up, I would come in, I'd go hike just to clear my mind. I'd come down the mountain, come down the hill, and I could see in my head the lights inside with my kids playing. And it absolutely came to pass. And that's always been no, I shouldn't say always. That has even recently been convicting to come back to that, as I have educated myself, as I am today, on manifestation, of going, okay, what's the other thing that I want? Can I get that granular with a plan and with really envisioning, like, I can see? That's the stories you have in your book that are so compelling. That is not how we live life. There's no life training for this.
Well, and that's where, again, I think, unfortunately, modern society leads us astray, because you look at all these movies that you were just mentioning. Every one of them has somebody sacrificing, working hard to save people, make the world a better place, do something for others. That is the fundamental core of our humanity. That mindset is what makes you manifest everything you want. But the manifesting, which we just talked about, which so resonates with our heart and souls, is when we do it for something beyond ourselves. That is the real power here of what we're talking about.
Well, and let's take that, again, you said you had this experience, and folks, again, this is what he starts a book out with. He's got the house. He's worth $70 million. He's got a fleet of exotic cars, and it was meaningless. And here you are with your head in your hands, weeping, and it's meaningless. You give it all up for the relationships, whatever. Okay. So let me not exaggerate. I guess it's the real story. now today, here you are in a nice house with a yellow Porsche. It's not that you disdain those things, but you have a different purpose for those, or within those, they have a different meaning, or maybe even just less attachment to them. They're nice things.
Well, I think that was a correct statement, the attachment part of it.
Yeah.
We know, and whether you want to quote Buddhist philosophy or other philosophy, attachment and craving are the biggest causes of suffering. And when you are solely attached to a goal and you don't attain it, then you're unhappy. But the thing people get confused about too, though, is what price are you going to pay to achieve that goal? And is that goal worthy of that work? Because if you destroy every relationship you have, if you're not present for your wife, your children, or your husband, or life happening around you, then while you may end up with the trophy, you're standing at the podium by yourself. And that is a completely empty experience. That was the trajectory I had been on. And now I will tell you, I've talked to some people that go, well, Jim, that's a great story, but I would just like to have that big house in the Porsche.
I do have to say the Porsche, though, that's I have a childhood connection. The Porsche, that is godly. Okay. So we'll set that one aside, but I'm with you. On this, James, when I think about that and think about myself and think about my history and the things that I have gone after, the ones that I went after with what I'll call an authentic drive. I knew what I was going after. I knew why. I really knew why at the core. And I was in agreement with that. That was my house. Absolutely. And it was a miracle that the way that it actually happened. The things that I went after for myself, and I don't have anything, horrendous that I was going after for some bad reason to prove myself or whatever. Mine were kind of heart focused too, but it was kind of fixing my self identity. I'm going to go after this thing, and I want it to be all about heart, because I don't want anybody to think it was about money or power or whatever. It was all about me, 100% about me. And I achieved burnout. I achieved business success with no fulfillment, and I achieved business failures also because they didn't work. I mean, either way, it was all a negative when it was about me. And to come back to the envisioning and even again, I'm going to use that word confidence. I always found more peace, more confidence, more resoluteness. I could envision it better when it was with a greater purpose in mind, which is a thread through your book, though you actually have that in a chapter as well. But that is a foundational. So even if you just want to increase your manifesting prowess, find a bigger purpose. And if you can't, that should probably be a red flag. Yes.
Oh, no, absolutely. And in fact, you should go back and reassess because, again, in some ways, this is a book not only about manifestation, but it's a book about how do you create a life that is a life you want. And I think, we were talking about success. And you said, well, I was a success. Well, the reality was what you're describing is becoming a failure. And even though by societal standards, quote unquote, you were a success, but the reality was, and this was my situation, I did all these things that I thought defined success. And in fact, they didn't in any way. Yeah. They led me so far astray, so disconnected that I was miserable. And for a period of time, I kind of go, well, look, I did all the stuff I did, what I'm supposed to do. Why am I so unhappy? And again, I was joking about, well, people said, well, I'd like to try that lifestyle. I had all of these friends who said, God, man, I would give, anything to live the life you're having. and what's so sad about this oftentimes is that we have a subset of extraordinarily successful people in terms of power, position, and wealth. And the thing, though, is because so many people in our society look up to that as quote unquote success, and they want to be there. But that subset of people who often have it, they're empty inside, and they keep thinking they're filling that emptiness by having people admire them and want to have what they have. And in fact, it's a zero-sum game for them. And an analogy I would also use, which is interesting, and I'm sure you're aware of this, if you ask high school students what they want to be, they'll say an influencer, a celebrity, a professional athlete, or a billionaire.
YouTuber is the one I hear.
Well, that's an influencer, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but this is horribly sad. And if you look at the reality of that, you have a subset of people who are, let's say, the influencers, yet it's a facade. They're using filters, they're using makeup, they're creating false narratives about where they've been or where they're going. I'm sure you've seen the one where, it showed somebody in what looked like an exotic environment. It was actually a very cropped picture in their backyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, these people know they're living a lie. And the problem is the heaviness of that lie beats on them and wears them down, and because they're completely inauthentic. And as a result, they have mental health issues to the point where some have even committed suicide. Because what makes a life, what makes us human, what makes us whole is being authentic, truthful about who we are, and the fact that we are flawed human beings who are doing the best we can. And the problem is, though, the group of people who watch these influencers oftentimes believe the narrative and then say, well, I'm clearly inadequate. I can't possibly be that way. Therefore, I'm a loser and I'm not worthy and I shouldn't even exist. And then this leads to this whole cycle of rumination. And sadly, we have social media, which hires neuroscientists and psychologists to create these drops of dopamine that get you addicted to these types of narratives. And it's a horrible, horrible thing. And I think this is also combined with something else, which is that for a period of time, there was a belief among educators that everyone should be a winner. Like 10 people sign up for the race, they all get awards.
Participation awards, yes.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that's not how life works. Mm. Life, unfortunately or fortunately, is one where you have to compete. Now, sometimes the competition is unfair, and I acknowledge that. Sometimes there are societal systemic problems that limit certain groups of people. But in general, you have to work hard, you have to achieve success, you have to show up, you have to do this over and over. And if you don't, you're not going to be there. Yet the problem is when you've given children that negative, it makes many of them feel very entitled. Well, I don't really have to work. I just need to show up and I should get a high salary. I only want to work 4 days a week and I want to get paid like the CEO. And you sit there and you go, this is not possible. But this also gets these people into this thinking of it's about me. I want. And again, this is fundamentally leads to failure and ultimate unhappiness.
I feel like we've come around circle, back to your story again. You had this experience as a kid with, her name was Ruth, since I've read the book, with this lady who led you into the fundamentals of manifestation, and you got the mechanics. So you went forward and said, I want the house, I want the Porsche, I want the whatever. And you really believed that you could do that. And so you did that part correctly. So there's part one of manifestation. And then as you showcase, you did it with the wrong, you used my word, but with the show here, drive. You had an unhealthy drive, one that was fear-based, as you said. And for some people, it could be to prove it. It's still a negative, drive. You had that. So you got the mechanics right, but you missed we could say the heart or the fulfillment. And that's what you've given us in this book.
And that's a perfect summation, Kevin.
Okay. Well, there's our anchor then. This has been the most beneficial thing that I have experience with manifestation, James. I want you to know that. And it is a relatively new concept as a focus. And I have read, I got Law of Attraction by the Hicks. I've done that. I've looked at some other stuff. And with theirs, I looked at it and thought, okay, I see some dynamics in here that are legit, that relate to, the Bible. And I can see that. And you've taken it and said, okay, here's the tangible aspect that I think we should all be able to embrace. And I don't know how you can really refute it. It feels like correct math. It just 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah. Well, and, within the book are all the references. And as I talked about, there's a 6-week program, but it can be any length you want. But I think that is the key. And, you have interspersed belief in God and religion in here. But, I don't know if you know Karen Armstrong. She's a former nun. She started the Charter for Compassion. She won the TED Prize in 2008. And she's written a number of books on Christianity, the life of Jesus, Buddha, Islam, et cetera, et cetera. And but the reason I bring her up is that when she won the TED Prize, she got a group of 19 spiritual and religious leaders together. And they said, what is at the core or basis of every religion? And that was compassion and the golden rule. And in some ways, what I've done here is to remove the dogma that culture and society has wrapped around these experiential beliefs that ultimately are based in science. Science has now proven them. And that's why there is compassion at the base of every religion, because from an evolutionary perspective, that is what defines our humanity. That is the genetic imperative, and that has allowed us to flourish. I should say most of us flourish as human beings.
Well, it's a gift. You gave me more than I expected, and I was already excited. James, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the heart that you put into this. I'm so grateful for your candor and humility, in the book. I don't think anybody can read it and not relate. And in the relation is why we can embrace this and improve our lives if we understand it, which you got some of the knowledge today. Now we're left to do the work, if we will. So thank you. Thank you for the equipping and for the inspiration. It's tremendous.
Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate it. It's really been a joy to be with you. I hope our paths cross again. And if I can help you in any way, let me know.
Well, friends, thank you for joining me on this journey. What a drive. Again, this is Dr. James Doty, and the new book that I would highly recommend you study into on this is Mind Magic, the Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. So significant. You can find him everywhere right now. I think he'll be coming out a lot of places, and this is profound to me. I hope it's profound to you as well. And I hope that this episode right here, right now, helps you drive further and enjoy the ride. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I look forward to meeting you in the Drive Tribe community for ongoing discussions about each episode. You can subscribe to the Drive Drop newsletter for weekly updates. Find it all at kevinmiller.co, along with all our social media and video clips. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride.